Welcome to StreetSmart Live. I'm Gordon Holmes, the founder, today's host, and very excited to have you all aboard. And we've got quite the episode today. But before we do that, I want everyone to look at the disclosures that'll come on your screen. All right. Today, I'm very excited to introduce Chris Moreau of Algernon Pharmaceuticals. Full disclosure, I'm a very happy shareholder and looking forward to some of the catalysts Chris is going to talk about today, hopefully, for the company. Chris, welcome aboard.
Thanks, Gordon. Nice to be a part of this, and thank you to all those who have joined. My understanding is that this is a bit of a new approach, and so we'll work through our program and plan, and hopefully it all goes smoothly, and we'll pick up the ball if we fumble it here. But again, thank you everybody for joining us. Just to remind the viewers, Algernon is a publicly traded company. We're trading on the CSE under the symbol AGN. We're trading OTCQB in the US under the symbol AGN PF. And we communicate to the public markets material, news, and information by way of news releases. These news releases come out prior to market opening. If there is a significant event that happens during the day, from time to time, the market is halted and the news is released and the market has a chance to digest it. So on days like today, we're really adding some color. We're joined by possibly three, but at least two guests. Dr. KSS, Dr. Swaim, founder of BioPub, will be joining us to give us his views, and also Steve Palmer, who's the president and chief investment officer of Alpha North Asset Management from Canada, and we'll get some comments from them about AGN and why they like the story. As a high level, Algernon Pharmaceuticals is a drug development company. The twist with Algernon is that we are not advancing new chemical entities. We are focused on drug repurposing. And specifically, that means finding new uses for older, safer drugs. And our program was developed by Dr. Mark Williams, our chief science officer. He understands biochemistry quite well. He's an avid reader. And Mark spent a number of years studying many different compounds, their mechanism of action, and in understanding their target mechanism of action, developed or postulated some theories on how these drugs could possibly be treating other illnesses than what they were originally developed for. That's what drug repurposing means. It's a bit different than repositioning a drug. That's taking a drug that for some reason failed in phase 1, 2, or 3, had never been approved. But repurposing is taking a drug that is approved. Hopefully, it's still being marketed in some region, and you're finding a new use for that drug. Why drug repurposing? It's very capital efficient. You can very quickly find out if there's efficacy by running animal models for that compound, and if you see a signal, you can very quickly move them into phase 2 human trials. Why? Because the preclinical work in phase 1 work has already been done. Now, about 90% of drugs never make it to phase 2. That's a stunning number. And the average cost is somewhere between 20 to 50 million. So if you could reduce the risk that your drug will be ultimately successful and efficacious, reduce the capital expense, reduce the time to market, to us, that sounded like an interesting business model. So we happily set off on that path. We investigated a number of compounds, but we want to talk today about our lead compound, which is a drug called ifenprotal, often mispronounced and perhaps not misunderstood. But ifenprotal is an ex-Sanofi drug. It was actually developed in the 1970s, and it was designed to treat intermittent claudication. This is a peripheral circulation disorder but it is an NMDA receptor antagonist. And I'm just sitting back waiting. I know when Doc has a chance, he's going to dig in on some of the science, and hopefully I can answer some of the questions. Keep in mind, Doc, Mark Williams isn't on the session today, but I'll do my best. As an NMDA receptor antagonist, it's interrupting the signaling, specifically glutamate signaling, and the ERK pathway, which is involved in inflammation in the lung. And so, as I mentioned on a few different discussions, the NMDA receptor is prevalent on many different cells throughout the body. It's prevalent in the lung. And Mark Williams initially had the theory that ifenprotal could interrupt the development of fibrosis in the lung. And so we began to study ifenprotal for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, scarring of the lung. Idiopathic means of an unknown origin. We ran a number of animal studies. We had very, very good data, and we were convinced to carry on investigating that drug in phase 2 trials, meaning with people. And those trials, in fact, there's a trial up and running now in Australia for IPF and ifenprotal. Back in March, there's Tony Pullen joining us. Back in March, we found out that a group of Chinese scientists, independent of Algernon, were also investigating ifenprotal for one of the world's most lethal flu viruses, an avian flu called H5N1. It has a 60% mortality rate. Think about that compared to 1 to 3% for COVID. And they found that ifenprotal in their animal study reduced mortality by 40%. And it was that study that caused us to reflect on ifenprotal, its potential to decrease both the severity and duration of a COVID infection. And we began a path for a clinical development program. I'm happy to say that we've jumped through many hoops. We've had, I think, a very unanticipated positive response just because of the timing from Health Canada, the US FDA. And today we are running a phase 2b3 clinical trial of ifenprotal for COVID-19. The trial is being run in the US, Australia, in the Philippines, and Romania. We just achieved 75% of our enrollment target of 150 patients. So we've enrolled 117 patients. And 113. I think we're up to 117 patients today. And that's a 30,000 foot view of Algernon with some detail. Just based on our timing, I'm going to introduce our first panelist guest, Steve Palmer, President and Chief Investment Officer of Alpha North Asset Management. He's also the founder. And if you run a biotech or technology company in Canada, a public company, and you're a CEO, you want to know Steve Palmer. And I met Steve a number of years ago, and we reconnected in the fall. Dr. Williams and I presented the Algernon private placement to him. Steve participated, and at one point, as I, looking at my notes, filed an early warning report, being possibly or up to getting close to 10% position in Algernon. So now I become the host. I'll turn it over to you, Steve, to any background that I've missed on you, and feel free to talk about your interest in Algernon and why you think it was worthwhile investing.
Thanks, Chris. Maybe just a quick comment on Alpha North. I founded the company with a couple of partners in 2007, and our flagship fund, the Alpha North Partners Fund, is the number one performing fund over the past year, gaining 121%. Algernon and that investment has contributed to that success. As you mentioned, we did invest in the private placement late last year at 8 cents. We still hold a significant position. At the time, why we liked the opportunity is it was less than a $10 million market cap company with the potential for ifenprotal in chronic cough and IPF. There was a public company called Bellis Health that also had a phase 2 drug candidate for the same indication, and that company had a market cap of several hundred million. So there was a huge valuation discrepancy. When the COVID pandemic broke in earlier this year, and you released the H5N1 data and your thesis as to why you thought ifenprodil could assist COVID patients, we aggressively added to our position. And I guess around that time is when we did go over 10%. The company has since raised more funds, which has diluted us a little bit, but we also participated in the 35-cent placement. So at this point, while we still think the risk-reward opportunity here is very attractive, the valuation, I think, is justified just based on the chronic cough and IPF trial. The whole COVID trial is just blue sky potential. If that were to be successful, there's significant upside on the stock, in my opinion. So just in the way of questions, Chris, why don't you outline the timing of the results for both the COVID trial and the chronic cough and IPF?
So for COVID, we the trial is 150 patients. We've reached 75% of enrollment. We have announced that we expect the trial to wrap up in November. And keep in mind this, so the trial is a 2-week treatment and then a 2-week follow-up. So when the last patient is entered, patient 150, they'll receive treatment for 2 weeks, or they'll be in the untreated arm. And then after that 2 weeks, then a follow-up. And then it takes anywhere from 4 to 5 weeks to review the data, scrub the data, review it. They have to confirm the data. There's a validation process. So we did announce that we are hoping to have our data readout before the end of Q4 of this year. On our IPF and chronic cough trial, I believe we're up to now 6 or 7 patients. We'll do a formal announcement when we hit 50%. It's a 20-patient trial, 12 weeks of treatment. And in addition to studying, of course, IPF, we're also investigating chronic cough. So when patients join the study, we get a baseline reading, and then I believe we get a baseline reading or a second reading within 1 month, and then at the end of their treatment period. So we are expecting the full enrollment and early data, which will be the cough portion. We're expecting to have that data in Q1 of 2021, and then we would expect the full data from the IPF part of the trial in Q2 of 2021. So we've got COVID up. Hopefully we have some positive data from COVID, and then we move on to chronic cough data, and then data on the IPF part of the study.
So that's one of the things I really like about it. You have multiple kicks at the can here. If one of those fails, you have second and third opportunity. And also you do have some other drug candidates in the pipeline. Can you discuss the timing of when maybe you'll push those forward into the clinic and what they are?
We have 3 other compounds, one that showed very good efficacy in our animal studies for non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, otherwise known as NASH, inflammatory bowel disease, and also chronic kidney disease. We have to be careful. We are still a small publicly traded company in terms of our resources. So we can only advance our programs provided we have the capital to do so. We're really fully committed right now on the trials that we have, and as our liquidity increases and our value, our enterprise value, then perhaps we can access additional resources and start moving those compounds forward. And really the process would be similar. It's to get a phase 2 trial going very quickly, confirm a signal in man, and then advance those compounds, bring them into the United States, file a pre-IND with the US FDA. With positive phase 2 data for each of the compounds we're advancing, we would expect a meaningful change, moments of inflection in our value. And that will, again, strengthen us and let us run multiple programs simultaneously.
Okay.
So Steve, just looking at the timing, I'm just going to not ride roughshod over you, but move on to our next guest. And I'd like to introduce Dr. KSS, Dr. Mark Swaim. And just a bit about Mark. I met Mark a few, probably 2 years ago in the very early days. Dr. Mark Williams, new doc, as we affectionately call him. And a bit of background, he is a graduate of Duke University with honors. He is a former practicing physician and also a researcher. And he is the founder of biopub.co, which is a small cap website that helps bring stories like Algernon to a global market. So with that, I'll introduce you, Doc, and feel free to give a bit more of a granular background on you and why you like the Algernon story.
Thank you, Chris. It's an honor to share stage or screen, whichever we're on, with you and all of you. BiPub tries to catch early these small cap special situation stories flying under radar. And when we began kind of poking around into the Algernon story, we were curious. And the problem was that I had a lot of stuff that I needed to unlearn. And I still think one of the big issues with getting the Algernon message clearly across to people is what drug repurposing is and what it isn't. You know, you would think that, well, maybe I could be forgiven for graduating, taking a year-long pharmacology course in a North American medical school and coming away and thinking that everything that mattered about every drug that mattered, I knew. Of course, that was very untrue. And, actually working with you and Mark has taught me lots of things I didn't know. And I had to unlearn a lot of things to really get the model down pat. There's a tendency to think about drug repurposing as a sort of pharmacologic equivalent of hand-me-downs, these clothes your granddad used to wear, maybe you can try them on, and that we're going to look for also or maybe for classy side effects. The first thing that leapt to my mind was if you're an endoscopist about to drop scope from above on somebody with gastroparesis, where their stomach doesn't empty, there's a good chance you're going to drop your scope into food and not see anything. So we often give that patient a shot of 100 milligrams IV erythromycin, the antibiotic, because it dumps the stomach out in a forward direction, moves contents down into the duodenum. I thought that was, what repurposing was about. And at first blush, it didn't necessarily excite me to cover that as an editor because we were so accustomed to glossy, sexy new chemical entities and that kind of work. And I realized I a lot of unlearning to do. And I think what your company does is actually get at the higher truth of these drugs, that it's an ugly duckling, beautiful swan thing. You find that they, in fact, were mispigeonholed to begin with, and you're finding the truer calling of the agents that you choose to work on, assisted in, of course, no small way by Mark Williams and his perspicacity, his love of the wee hours, his love of reading and piecing stories together. The drivers of idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis have long baffled me. I treated livers for decades, and it's tempting to draw some analogies between livers and lungs as regards pathologic fibrosis. I don't know how far those analogies really go, but certainly this company has tremendous things, really, capital T, tremendous things for getting at the drivers of pathologic pulmonary fibrosis and something that you can do about that. Who would have thought that a NMDA receptor not in the brain would be, the culprit here, and yet the data are overwhelming and persuasive. And when we were first contemplating covering the company, we cover it whole hog now. It's a top 5 holding in my portfolio, and I'm proud that it's there. We said to ourselves, well, let's raise the bar high, see if they execute. And I don't know that I've ever seen a company that has executed line by line, point by point, everything they say they're going to deliver on, they deliver. I don't know when they sleep. I don't know when they rest, but they seem number for the wear. I think I am proud of you, Chris, the CEO and a colleague, because you had your work cut out for you chasing IPF and the other prospective indications for ifenprotal when COVID hit, and it was the anvil breaking the camel's back. I think, boy, they're going to chase that one too, and do a bang up job of it as well. So you were running multiple directions at the same time, and yet always composed and well put together and never discombobulated. I'm anxious to see where this story continues. We know there are other clinically not yet worked up indications, and they may hold the same kind of fruit that you found thus far. Of course, the final verdict isn't in on any of the clinical trials, but given the strength of the underlying biochemistry, the potency of the animal model data, there's reason for certainly for considerable optimism.
As we've always said, drugs are approved on efficacy. On efficacy, they have to be safe.
Right.
And that was another, I think, compelling part of the repurposed story. And when we were telling it initially, there was just, as you said, some people had to untrain what they had typically thought about the natural progression. And if you're spending $50 million with an NCE prior to getting to phase 1, you better know everything about its mechanism and its target. Because if something goes wrong, you've got to make adjustments. But I mean, I believe our budget to bring a drug into a phase 2 is about $2.5 million US. And Mark and I had a call from a well-known US investment banking firm. Their vice president complimented Mark and I on the phone and said that he's got firms that are spending $1 million a month and they are not doing anything.
Right. Your thrift is extraordinary. What you've accomplished, with thrift, you make a dollar go a very long way, but I don't underestimate the motivation and the firepower of this company, people, if you're thinking of investing in it. It continued to surprise and surprise and surprise. And Chris and I would run into each other on the road again, and he was ahead of where I'd predicted he would be every single time. And I say that no flattery or no sucking up intended. It's really been an impressive run. And a question I would have for you is, how do you keep from becoming your own toughest act to follow, Chris?
Sorry, I missed the last part of the question, Doc.
How do your run with ifenprotal development, 2-3 indications, possibly others to come, has been so torrid. How do you keep from being toughest act to follow as a pharma?
I missed that again. I think there's a bit of a connection. But sorry, Doc. I missed that last part of the question.
How do you keep from becoming your own toughest act to follow? What are you going to do for encore?
We always have. We've got things. We've got things that we're always working on and thinking about that. What's next? We're trying to drive value for shareholders. What I can say is that I think the NMDA receptor is a very interesting target.
Agree.
And I think it's worthy of additional of investigation. So we'll leave it at that. Thanks for your comments, Doc. We're going to round out with the introduction of Tony Pullen, investment banker, capital markets specialist from Canada. Tony, thanks for joining us. As you can see, I'm joining Carson here today. I was joking earlier that I thought Gordon was going to do all of the hosting, but I'm hosting my own show. It sounds like, and I'm being toasted instead of roasted. But I guess it's tough to roast me when I'm right in front of the screen, and so
you'll get your turn either way.
Yeah. We're saving up for you, Chris.
Yeah. Okay. Tony, welcome to the presentation, and you've got can I say 40 or should I say 50-year history in capital markets game in Canada? And I'll let you give us some more background.
I'm a little worried about time. Some people say I'll be late for my own funeral, and I apologize for being somewhat late, but I had a little trouble with communications because we're distancing up in the northern part of Ontario, and the map of the lake we're on is right behind me over my shoulder. That's an old historical map of Georgian Bay for anybody who's interested. The Yeah, Chris is right. I've been around the industry since the late 60s. Started during the Suez oil crisis in 67. And I have my gray hair because I got really interested in biotech in the mid 80s and have been following the sector ever since. And its ups and downs, its flirtations with greatness, but more often than not, it's being beset by failures that have discouraged Canadian investors, particularly institutions, from even getting anywhere near the space. I met Chris along the way on a number of occasions. Unfortunately, when he and Mark set out to finance, when he took the stewardship of what is now Algernon, I wasn't able to help him as much as I would have liked to, primarily because the environment was just so negative around small cap Canadian biotech. And but as I've said to him, since he grabbed onto the high bar here in the COVID crisis, it's been exciting to watch. And I've been saying to him, he's been training for this job for all his career. And he's finally in a seat where he can bring his highest and best talents to bear. I haven't known Mark as long, and but have been incredibly impressed by his scientific acumen. And obviously, the COVID opportunity has woken up biotech interest in Canada as it is all over the world. But in Canada, it's from such a low base. And unfortunately, the currency of involvement in the disease got diluted pretty quickly by literally dozens of companies throwing up a shingle saying that they have relevance to the disease. All of that was impossible to judge by retail investors, so the currency became pretty debased pretty quickly. Chris had to walk a fine line between exploiting an exciting asset and having to come away with the valuation gain from its potential by putting some money in the till. And as far as I'm concerned, that navigation has been the only problem that has kept Algernon from getting much higher recognition, because the second factor that has retarded interest in therapeutics has been the myopic excitement and hope. I use the word hope, capital H, in the markets for a vaccine, which all my experts tell me is a very misplaced hope. The problem has been that interest in therapeutics has taken second stage to that hope, and yet it's only going to be the therapeutics that bring this under control. And so I think Chris has got a leading candidate to show up in. I learned a word in this cycle. The word is armamentarium. And armamentarium, if you look it up, is a word that describes the medical armament or the medical weapons to deal with any kind of disease. And this disease calls out for a huge armamentarium of initiatives. And I have no doubt that Ivan Prodel will play a role. I guess having said all that, the question I have for Chris, given the interest in Steve focused on, and I've known Steve, God, Steve, how long have you and I known each other?
20 years.
Yeah. And I got to say, the question I have is because I've lost track of it. What is the background for the potential efficacy for your chronic cough candidate in terms of the scientific rationale for its potential effectiveness? And what I neglected to mention is that where I think there's no doubt Ivan Prodel plays a role is that there's acute lung injury, and along with a lot of other knock-on problems like coronary disease. Acute lung injury is going to be the front line of this disease, both immediacy as it resurges and in its aftermath. If anybody saw Donald Trump standing up on the White House last night and was able to not throw up, it was hard to imagine that guy being healthy. Anyway, I'm just saying that what is the rationale for the chronic cough indication given the massive disconnect between your valuation at 40 million and Bellus having failed in a phase 2 at still 200 some odd million?
So, just to remind the audience, so we initially investigated ifenprotal for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, and then Mark Williams was studying the mechanism of action. And because ifenprotal gets past the blood-brain barrier, it has a neurological effect. And currently, it's treating dizziness and vertigo in Japan and South Korea. So Mark started to think about, maybe there's a mechanism of action here where ifenprotal will reduce cough in the brain, not at a tissue level. That was his theory, along with what we had seen from IPF reducing fibrosis in our animal studies. So we did an animal trial with guinea pigs because mice don't have a coughing reflex. So it's a classic guinea pig model run by Pharmadex out of the UK. We mimicked the study that Bellus used when they compared their drug up against Merck's gefapixant. We tried to use Bellus's drug as a comparator, but they haven't disclosed, and they hadn't then, and they haven't now disclosed the compound. So we were only to test against Merck. But we had 110% reduction in cough count and a dramatic delay in cough onset. So when we were looking at that data, we just said, we should add to our IPF study a component for cough. Cough is a big problem with IPF patients. And we think that although this is a smaller study, we'll have enough patients to see some statistical significance that can then drive the next part. So interestingly enough, and again, we'd need Mark here, our CSO, to untangle it, but we do have a slide on our website. If you look at our corporate presentation, where he has an image of the mechanism of action for the NMDA receptor, being ifenprotal, and how it works in a totally different way, or how he thinks it might work to help reduce cough. More about having you not think about the cough as much. Might be a layman's way of expressing how it's not very scientific, but that's it's a very complex process, and hopefully that answers your question, Tony.
Thank you.
Just one other point about, and I think it is fair to be a little more specific about Bellus, because they do have 70 million in the bank. They are on the NASDAQ. They were an older company. They had institutional investors, and all of those things play into a company's valuation. And I've been criticized a bit by trying to compare Algernon to Bellus, but what I've really tried to be more pointed with is comparing the performance of our compound against the Bellus drug, BLU. And that, if they're at a current market cap and they didn't hit their endpoints, what might we achieve if we do hit our endpoints in our IPF and chronic cough study? So I think that's fair. But corporately speaking, there are significant differences to being a small company on the CSE.
No, I think you're still suffering in terms of market cap from the very points I raised earlier, where there's too many, it's a crowded field of claimants, and it's hard for you to stand out in a market that has become so skeptical about those claims.
To be fair to you, we did have to stop. We did have a tremendous ride in terms of our appreciation of our value. We did need to stop and raise capital to run our COVID trial. And we went from 100 patients now up to 150 patients. And so, yes, we did a financing at 35 cents, and some might look back and say, that was a moment. But pre-revenue companies like Algernon, we have to go to the capital markets to raise capital until we have some sort of a crystallization or an event where we're licensing or partnering out. We needed that capital. We have it. It did add to the number of shares outstanding. There's always a bit of dilution that occurs. My job is to make sure that the company has the treasury in place to execute its milestones, and hopefully the next raise, whenever that occurs for any company like Algernon, is done at a better price and with better liquidity. That's what we're working towards. But we're pre-revenue. When investors step into a company like Algernon, they, I think, need to understand that the company relies on the capital markets to finance and drive its agenda. I'm going to turn it back to you, Gordon.
Okay, well, I appreciate it. Chris, that was an incredible presentation for me as an investor getting an update. Steve, and I'm always great to have you talking and telling what's going on. Mark, most of that was way above my pay grade, but I'm sure a lot of people understood it. And Tony, glad you were able to make it. So that really kind of covers the fundamental side of the company. But for me as an investor, I always like to look at a chart. So Clive Mond, who couldn't join us today, he's in Chile working on his getting his computer set up, has given us this chart. So could we see the chart, please? Ron, I think you have something. There you go. So Clive Mond is on the top. He's out of Chile. Quite the chart man. You'll notice the triangle in the very center, where he says triangle. Very bullish. Volume patterns, declining. So all in all, I think this has a very positive chart according to Clive Mond. So unless Chris, you have a final sign off.
You
good?
Thank you again for this initiative, and just want to thank all of our viewers. We're working hard behind the scenes. We're driving as certain things we can't control. One of them is enrollment, but we believe we're situated in facilities that as infection rates go up, one other important note. Just to round this out, we can't control the result of our phase 2 like any other company. 50% of phase 2 studies fail due to a number of reasons. Of the 50% of failure, 30% due to safety. We believe that because we have a known safety history with ifenprodil, and the phrase "do no harm" is very important when you're looking at clinical trials. When you have an NCE that's a new chemical entity, there's a huge amount of unknown, because it's only been tested likely for a small period of time. That's an issue with some of the COVID treatments. One of the interesting things about ifenprodil, 40-year safety history. Some of the most serious adverse events include mild GI, headache. We're not talking about serious issues with our drug. So we believe that we have an increased chance of a successful phase 2 trial because we've reduced, not eliminated, reduce the chance of a failure due to a safety issue. So that's my final thoughts. Thank you for your support. Feel free to reach out to us at info@Algernon Pharmaceuticals, and look forward to the next time when we can spend together and talk to you about this exciting opportunity.
Great. Thanks, Chris, and everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Call